All right, take three. You guys aren't here for the tech savviness, I'm sure. So, hi everyone, this is For the Love of Comics, and a very warm welcome to another Sunday live stream. You would think by now I would have things in order, but first I was talking for about 10 minutes with no without actually being live, and then I was talking with no audio, but luckily it seems that I am now on the internet and people can hear me. So thank you very much for your patience, and thank you for joining me for this very special episode. They're all special episodes, but this one in particular, I was really looking forward to doing live. If you're new here or if you're not that familiar with the channel, I do every month or every 6 weeks or so, I do a special new recent reads and new acquisitions video in which I talk about things that I have read very recently, as opposed to, you know, the kind of spotlight videos on old favorites of mine. And I also talk about things that I have maybe purchased but not gotten around to reading yet. And these are usually edited videos, but I wanted to do this one live because ever since I've started this channel 3 years ago, I've received a lot of loving complaints about how much money I have cost people. You know, people write to me saying, my wallet curses you and you've made me spend money yet again, and I'm just buying more and more books because of your videos. And I really want, first of all, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. But I really wanted to say that it works both ways. Ever since I started this channel, I would say 30, maybe more % of my reading, of my purchasing, of the books that I'm collecting, reading every day, every month, is coming from viewer and subscriber suggestions in the comments, in private messages or emails to me, and most recently on our Discord server, which I'm spending a lot of time there because the discussion and the conversation is so great, but also because there are so many wonderful recommendations to be had. And over the last 3 years, I have read a number of comics that I may not have encountered or I may not have tried out if it hadn't been for the enthusiastic endorsements and evangelical support that I received from people who watch this channel. And I think particularly because of the way I make my videos and the videos I put out there, people often write to me and say, if you like this, you would love this, which is just my favorite kind of recommendation. It's not just, I loved it, so I'll go ahead and tell everyone to read it, which of course happens, and that's what the basis of this channel is, but sort of evaluating, sorry about that noise, but evaluating what tastes or what's the way I can put it? The way people lean, and evaluating how they lean and recommending on the basis of that. But also, given the fact that I am interested in the comics medium, I am interested in what can be done in this format. So it's not that I only read American comics or only read superhero comics or European comics or manga. All of these things, these recommendations and suggestions come across all of these genres, across all of these geographies, and a lot of things that I have discovered I have climbed to my favorite reads, things I really love. So thank you very much. Thank you so very much for fueling this passion of mine, and thank you very much for giving back to me as much as I try to put out there for people. I like to spotlight my favorites, and I love it when people tell me about their favorites. So today's video is a special one because instead of making it a regular edited video, I thought it would be terrific to take viewer recommendations as an opportunity to have a live stream with the viewer chat working over here. So that's what we have over here. Now, these are not the these are not all, obviously. These are not all the viewer suggestions that I've received, even in the last 6 months, let alone the last 3 years. These are just a selection. I might have to do a part 2, part 3. Maybe I'll just make this a regular habit. The one episode of Recent Reads and New Acquisitions that is based purely on viewer recommendations. So this is a selection, and I'll just get it out of the way right now that I enjoyed all these books. All of the ones I'm going to talk about today are ones that I enjoyed reading to various degrees. Some a lot, but everyone at least a little. And again, that's sort of par for the course. People sometimes say that, are there any comics you don't like? Or is there something that isn't like? And there are, obviously, I've often read things that I haven't enjoyed as much. I just don't make videos on them. I don't spend the time shooting and editing and processing things. It's a lot of effort, so I like that effort to be for celebrating things and spotlighting things. So that's what I have today, a selection of things I really enjoyed, and I'd like to talk to you about them. I'm not going to, unfortunately, name every single person who recommended certain things to me. One, because some of them were recommended by 2 or 3 people, and then in the rush to make this video, I wasn't able to necessarily get every name. But if you are someone who told me to read what I have over here, call it out in the chat, put it in the comments below, and say that was me, and I will definitely acknowledge that. There are a couple that, of course, I'll be able to identify who asked me to read them for some obvious reasons, but yeah, that's what I have over here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 books, but of course we could talk about many more. So let's get started. Oh, nice to see everyone in the chat. Yes, thank you very much, everyone, for your patience. I finally got the audio working. I am using a new microphone for those of you who are interested today from my previous live streams, because I received a lot of feedback from you guys that the volume was really, really low. So this is not a dynamic microphone. But the problem with this is it's going to pick up all sounds. So I apologize in advance for any traffic noises or any other sounds that come through. Oh yes, it is a compliment that someone has joined at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning. That is that I take that as the highest compliment. All right, so let's get started with the first book that I have over here, and let's see if this actually works. Can you? There we go. This is Torpedo. It's written by Sanchez, Abuli. I think it's pronounced Abuli, and the art is by Jordi Bernet. And this is a book that was recommended to me as not this particular. This is volume 3 from IDW, and this was recommended, as in the series was recommended, as something that I should try out. Torpedo, I had never heard of it, but as soon as I think 2 people recommended it to me, Earl Grey, whose videos I am a big fan of, and I know a lot of you are also fans of Earl Grey's YouTube channel. In case you don't know, you should definitely check it out. It's a fantastic, very inspiring channel. And he made a video on Jordi Bernet, and I immediately took this as a sign, where you have 2 people telling you this, and you have a video from a person you follow all in the space of 24 hours or something like that. You definitely have to check it out. However, these hardcover volumes from IDW were really difficult to track down. I only found 2, and one of them actually got cancelled. My order got cancelled because it wasn't, in fact, in stock. So volume 3 and volume 2, I think I had ordered, and volume 3 is the only one that got delivered. And that's fine, because I really just wanted to try it out. I just wanted to check it out, and this was quite an interesting. Book. The hero, if you can call him that, is definitely not a. He's not a good guy. He's not a good guy in any sense of the word. He is. a violent person. He has quite a temper, but there's also a sort of nastiness in these stories that don't have to do only with him. It has to do with all of the characters, and in that way, it's a very alluring sort of crime and dirty fiction, if that makes sense, because it's one of those tropes that I find quite interesting, is that can you make unlikable characters into a good story? Because the common sort of wisdom goes that you need a certain kind of sympathy, you need a certain kind of empathy in order to really to really get into a story, to have a story have meaning. And that's obviously not true in the absolute sense. We know that there are lots of stories with anti-heroes and lots of things with antagonists in the lead, so to speak, the protagonists being antagonists. And it's in that second category for sure, because in spite of not necessarily having a likable person, there are a number of things, especially when you get a little bit of his backstory, when you get a little bit of how life was for him as a kid, you realize that the story isn't only about one person, it's really about an environment. And that, I think, is where stories like this are the most successful, because they tell you about how people are the products of the society that they live in, whether it's an economic condition, whether it's a political situation. And we've always had this fascination with the people who will do anything to survive, who can thrive under the most desperate of situations because they know how to work things to their advantage, or they've honed their skills almost at a level of survival. And that is, that's definitely the case over here. But even with all of that, the real draw is obviously the artwork, which is truly spectacular. I mean, I'm not very familiar with Jordi Bernet's art. I think there is an issue of Solo, the DC series that I had read, and I think maybe I've seen, other than that one issue, maybe I've seen snatches of his work, but this was the first time I was able to focus, on full stories. And these stories are violent, they contain nudity, so you want to be careful. It's definitely not all ages reads, but what I found in this is that it reminded me very much of my favorite crime stories, whether they are Stray Bullets or the crime stories of Brubaker and Phillips, where you've got this sort of undercurrent of amorality in everything around you, but the artwork is also so potent that the action, the violence is extremely attractive. It's alluring. The movement, the angles, it's very cinematic. And I'm the only thing I think I would have over here, and again, this is not even it's not even an objection, it's just a caveat for people. It's sort of a warning that it does feel of a different time, as in maybe also, again, because of the situation, because of the time and the circumstances and the culture, etc. Violence against children, violence against women, a certain kind of misogyny permeates almost every single relationship and all the behavior over here, which for some people might be extremely off-putting. I mean, to me, you have to read these things with a certain kind of context. The only problem is that sometimes the art, and this is definitely art, the art can be misinterpreted, by which I mean that I've often seen this, and I've seen this definitely with stuff like this, like with gangster movies, The Godfather, Heat, with Michael Mann movie. I've seen people quote Scarface and those kind of things. as if they're sexy, as if these are meant to be emulated, as if their attitudes towards women and the way they treat women is something to be admired. And I really think that they're missing the point. But sometimes I think it's easy for them to miss the point because the art is so terrific. It's so wonderful. The movie is so cool. The movie is so exciting. The movie is so, incisive in its depiction of characters. And the characters are so fully fleshed out and so three-dimensional that they become attractive to the viewer. So this is one of those really perennial questions with art, as in, do we have nothing as far as responsibility is concerned? And I definitely think you have responsibility, but this is something else. This is like the better you are as an artist, the better you are at creating characters and creating a world, the greater the danger of being misconstrued, of being misinterpreted, or of being co-opted. And I think that's one of the issues that could easily arise from something like this, because it's so slick, because it's so cool. Even though it's not glamorous, it can come across as glamorous when you look at this line work, when you look at these environments, when you look at these situations. And that's something, I don't think that's the fault of the creators. I think it's in the eye of the beholder. That's my opinion. But I really enjoyed this. I don't know if I would automatically seek out more volumes of Torpedo. I mean, they seem pretty hard to find anyway, but I don't know if I need to. It's not like a number of series. I know when I read one or two volumes, I definitely have to read the others, even though they're separate adventures. And then there are other series in which I feel, okay, I got the idea, I get it. It will be great if I can pick some up, but I'm not going to go out and seek it. And I think that can be the case for even the best of comics. I'm trying to think of some good examples. Lone Wolf and Cub is one of them, where it's fantastic. It's a brilliant series, and people who watch this channel know that I'm a big fan. But if I don't find every single volume and every single story of Lone Wolf and Cub, it's okay, because it's episodic, because it's not all about, continuity and a larger sort of there are arcs, but you know what I mean. So it's along those lines that I don't have to have every single volume. If I did obviously run across more copies of Torpedo or more volumes of Torpedo, especially in these slim hardcovers, I'd definitely pick them up. But since they're out of print or they seem to be very hard to get, I'm quite happy with having this one and having a sampler of these stories. But if you have read the whole series, or if you do know the other stories, especially if you know these IDW ones, maybe you could tell me if Volume 3 is a good sampling of the stories. Are there better stories in the other volumes? Are they more or less the same, or are they, because I was happy with Volume 3, because sometimes Volume 1 is good from, I'm talking about generally about series. Volume 1's nice when you get that historical, like this is how it started, etc. But for a number of series, Volume 1s are not their strongest stories. They're just getting started and they're just finding their voice. There are obviously exceptions. Some series just hit the ground running. Some series peak really early. But in this case, Volume 3 coming in sort of the middle. I think there were a total of 6 volumes. It's not like the Max, for example, where if you don't get the, I've not been able to find Volume 5 or Volume 6. And that's irritating, because I want to finish the story and I want to read on. This didn't affect me that way. So I was happy. I was happy with what I got. Was jumping in at a later volume a good experience? Yeah, I definitely thought it was. It didn't, and there are stories in here that flash back to his childhood, so it didn't feel necessarily that you had missed something. You felt like there's enough stuff being supplied from time to time, which is one of the things that I like about series like Usagi Yojimbo, for example, where you get flashbacks throughout that series. So it makes it very easy to jump into that series because you're always under the impression that contexts are being filled in for you, and that was the case over here. I also wonder, and I can't be sure about this, but I also think that the level of polish in this artwork, the level of detail and the level of liquidity and the level of atmosphere, let me put that on again, is what did I do? I did something weird, didn't I? Well, anyway, the level of that polish, I think, may be something that has come from honing the craft, and that's why I think Volume 3 was fine, because I'm just assuming that this is the culmination of a lot of different kinds of experimentation and trying new things, so on and so forth. Again, I'm not very familiar with Jordi Bernet, so I know that Torpedo is considered, and again from the video by Earl Grey is my main thing. I know it's considered to be like the epitome of his craft in some ways. So I thought it was really good. Peter, thank you for stopping by. Yes, Lone Wolf and Cub is primarily episodic, and it works terrifically episodically. It's the sort of quintessential samurai on the road sort of stories, which, I mean, the more I think about it, the more I find has been probably influenced by that. Yeah, bad people making bad choices in a bad world. Yes, and Gorvidal. Yes, absolutely. I was talking about why I think I was engaged by it. It's not, but it's not, an admirable character. It's not something where the stories are thrilling me with what they're able to do as far as making you like a character is concerned. But anyway, that's my first book for today. That's Torpedo. The next book I have over here is the fifth Beatle, which I'd heard a lot about. Don't worry, I'll give you a better angle on it. Which I'd heard a lot about for many years, and I knew that it even, I think it was an Eisner nominee with for Best Writer for sure. I think it had maybe another nomination or so. It's the Brian Epstein story. Now, I will admit that I didn't know almost anything about Brian Epstein. I mean, I knew his name, but that was it. So, and when I'd heard the fifth Beatle, I thought it was about what was his name? Pete Best. I thought it was about the guy who quit the Beatles before they became famous. But it's not. It's about Brian Epstein, who was the manager of the Beatles. But even once I'd known what it's about, I wasn't sure about it. I don't know why. This is just one of those things that, people have prejudices and biases, and they're not quite sure why. It's happened to me so many times. I mean, most recently, in my previous video, I talked about Superman Smashes the Klan, which I resisted for a long time just because the title made me think, I mean, smashing the Klan, that's a little simplistic. It's like, I have no idea what the story is about. I have no idea, whether it's complex or not. It's just I have a bias because of the title. And I think the fifth Beatle worked that way for me at the beginning, where I was just like, it's just going to be a music biography, or it's going to be like, the Beatles couldn't have been the Beatles without this manager, or some forgotten person. It's I don't know why, but I really don't know why, but when I read this, written by Vivek J. Tiwary and illustrated by Andrew C. Robinson with a chapter by Kyle Baker. I like Kyle Baker. I thought this book was terrific. This really, really surpassed my expectations. And this again was something that I had hemmed and hawed about, had gone back and forth on, and it wasn't until someone in the comments someone in the comments said, have you read this? It's really good. You would really love it. And again, I was just like, all right, it's not just somebody saying, they're saying this on the basis of a video of mine they've just watched. So they must be doing some sort of an evaluation over here. So I'll give it a shot. And I was looking for it, and the very day that I went to look for it, I found it on sale. I think it's a used copy. It's a little shelf worn, and but it for all intents and purposes, it's new. I mean, the inside is gleaming. The cover's a little dusty. I don't even think there are any dinged corners, but it was on sale for very cheap, which again, I'm not a superstitious person until it comes to something that makes me buy comics, in which case all superstitions are allowed. So I was like, this is a sign. I must take this as a sign. It's on such tremendous sale that I will pick it up. And it was terrific. It was very well written. It was very entertaining. The art in it is fabulous, and it does exactly what I think biographies should do. It should give you a sense of that person without necessarily trying to be comprehensive. You don't have to go from birth to death. You really have to give a sense of who this person was and why it matters. And in this case, why it matters would seem to be it matters because he gave the world the Beatles. And when you read this story from, let's say, the facts or the history point of view, again, I don't know how historically accurate this is, but it seems pretty historically accurate. There are good notes at the back, and there's a fair amount of research that's gone into it, but there's obviously the same kind of licenses with biographies that you always see. It was thrilling. It was thrilling to see how this rich kid decided to defy all common wisdom and sense and invest in this band from Liverpool, and the manner in which he invested, which is buying their records, because his father owned a chain of record stores, and how much of his own money he spent in getting the Beatles gigs and getting the Beatles albums sold and getting them on the radio, getting them on the Ed Sullivan Show. It really wasn't something that I knew the extent of. And so that's one part of what makes this book great. It illuminates, for me, the role that this guy played. But more than that, I think, is the beauty of this book's approach to this character. Brian Epstein was gay, and he was gay at a time when it wasn't okay to be out, and he suffered for it in a variety of different ways, in spite of his wealth, in spite of the fame that he was able to get for the Beatles, and how he struggled with his identity and how that manifested the relationships, how that manifested in the relationships that he had is very subtly and elegantly captured in this book. There's also this art style, and by the art style, I just don't mean the drawings. I mean the way it moves between the concrete and the sort of abstract, the way ideas are put across in the comics medium, where things that are solid kind of dissolve into dreams. And I'll try to see if I can find a section over here. There's this section right at the end when he is dying, spoiler alert, in bed, that really felt like something out of the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, where it's this white room and this bed and this man, and he's being visited by all these people, and are these conversations actually taking place or are they not? There's this chapter over here. This is the chapter that's drawn by Kyle Baker, which is Chaos in the Philippines, particular chapter in the Beatles' history, which which takes on this different approach in its portrayal, which again I thought worked terrifically. It's a far bolder and a far more experimental comic than I thought. I think one of the reasons why I was trepidatious about, I thought it would be sort of a boring history lesson, by the numbers biopic sort of thing, and that's why I think I was also so very pleasantly surprised at the boldness that it had. This sequence, just coincidentally, but this sequence where he meets Elvis Presley's manager was fantastic. The difference between these two managers, two of the biggest stars, and Elvis was the guy that Brian Epstein, when he first heard the Beatles or when he watched them perform live, he said they're going to be bigger than Elvis, and that was one of those most foolish statements, sort of things. So when he meets Presley's manager, the difference between them and the way that Elvis Presley's manager is then depicted. Here we go. It's not necessarily literal, but it's extremely effective. Where he says, "You take 50% of everything Elvis earns," and he goes, "No, Elvis takes 50% of everything I earn." And just the way the music business and the way that money and popularity and fame, sit next to art. It's not overt in this book, but it's definitely there in every single chapter. It's definitely there in all of this, this narrative of getting these people famous, of making them famous, of making them hits, but then they end up, many would, I think, justifiably say, changing the world. So how one man was responsible for that ended up being a fascinating story for me, and I was really, really happy that it was recommended to me, and I finally got over whatever biases I was holding on to, nothing logical, and got into, and picked up this book. I really enjoyed this. I would really recommend this for anyone who likes the Beatles and who likes biographies, who likes comics biographies. But in general, I think it's a pretty good comic. I still don't know why I was so reluctant to read it. All right, let's see if there are any questions about this book over here. There was a movie a couple of years ago that fan-fictioned the sexual affair between Epstein and Lennon. It's interesting. I mean, there is let me see if I can find it. There is a section, there's one not even a chapter, it's like one panel over here. I mean, I don't want to say it's a spoiler, but yes, I wouldn't even say it's a hint. There's just this one thing in which Lennon turns to him and says, "What about me? Do you fancy me?" or something like that. But it comes across as really playful, or Epstein is very sincere and he's like, "Yes, I do," and it depends on how you interpret it. I think you could kind of interpret it as Lennon making a pass at him, but it could also be interpreted, I think. This is the page. It can also be interpreted as him being sort of a dick, and kind of. It's right. Let me see if I can get this in here. And that's about it. So, I mean, I think the movie must be much more explicit. This is just, it's like these 3 or 4 panels. That's it in this whole book. So, and I like that as well. I like the way that you can look at that scene, you can look at even that little brief exchange in a couple of different ways. I think that's part of the art of this book, of how how elegantly it handles things, which I think can be difficult in biographies of famous people, biographies of famous people who have had, lots and lots of biographies written about them. I mean, Brian Epstein perhaps hasn't been written about that much, and that's kind of, I think, what writer Vivek Tiwary says at the end, where he really wanted to write about this person in the way that he was and found out about him. But even the Beatles, they come across really, they come across very well. They come across as kids. There's something about how maybe they've been represented, particularly the more years that go by, as sort of gods who changed pop music and stuff like that, which again, I'm not doubting, but the fact that they come across over here as funny kids, bratty kids, sort of being herded by Epstein, was a refreshing take. And I found that to be, again, not knowing the Beatles personally, I never hung out with them, but it felt very authentic and it felt very accurate, which is, after all, what good storytelling is supposed. It's not, I don't know if it's supposed to only inform you about the truth. It's supposed to create its truth, and I think it did a very good job, from beginning to end. Well, more than half the class didn't know who the Beatles were. Yeah, I think with people of a certain age, it's getting to that point where a lot of things are like, you don't know who, you don't know this person, you don't know that person. Oh well. All right, so that was the fifth Beatle, which again I highly recommend. I enjoyed it, and I think you will too if you give it a shot. What should we look at next? Here is a very unusual book. This is Beanworld by Larry Marder, and I had never heard of Beanworld until someone recommended it to me. Now that I have read it, and then I read about a little bit about it, now I know that it's a very popular, very famous, well, maybe, I mean, again, it's all relative, but it is a cult favorite apparently, and I'm shocked that I hadn't even at least heard of it before, because this is a very unusual and very interesting comic. I don't know, I don't know if everyone knows about Beanworld other than me, but it's, I mean, I'm even before I made this, as I was preparing to make this video, I was thinking, what am I going to say about this comic? How am I going to describe it? And I kept faltering. It's one of those comics that I think you should just read, and that's the way I went into it. Someone said, it's a very strange comic, but you would love it. And I was like, oh, well, okay, I trust you. You know me. You know my tastes. So maybe you're right. It's probably one of the most comprehensive, sort of detailed worlds that is built, that is also fairly nonsensical, but at the same time it has a very solid logic. It's got different cultures, some of them are beans. It's got different environments with different resources. Some of them are triangles, some of them are it's very difficult to describe, because it is its own thing. If I try to compare it to other things, I would just fail, because it exists in its own universe. But the most interesting thing about the Beanworld world, about the Beanworld universe, as it were, is how amazingly self-contained its ecology is. So if you think about something like the Lorax by Dr. Seuss, this question of sustainability, of how things depend on each other, even if they're opposed to each other, sometimes because they're opposed to each other. If you have predator and prey, if you have hunter, if you have farmers and crops and things that take the crops, this is a comic that is all about these fantastical elements in this fantastical universe that is in no way related to our world, is no way related to our universe, in which these creatures exist in balance with each other. But of course, these stories are all about various disruptions to those existing relationships, to those balances, and how when certain creatures that you think of as your enemies are in fact affected by something else that has a knockdown effect on you. Now, this makes it sound extremely I don't know, maybe it makes it sound really boring, but that's just the difficulty in describing how unusual this is. It's a very conceptual comic. There's definitely a lot of artistry in here, and by that I don't mean, fidelity of anatomy and things like that. What I mean is that the way it's composed, the way it's laid out, it's extremely effective. There is no doubt in your mind what is going on. You have no doubt about the characters' motivations. You have no doubt about the movement. You have no doubt about the relationships, about where they are spatially, geographically from each other, and the kind of problems that come up and the kind of resolutions that come up are, to you as the reader, seem terrific. They seem inevitable. They seem brilliant. They seem smart. But all of it because of rules and parameters created by the comic itself. You don't bring anything from outside. You don't bring your own logic. You don't bring your own morality. This book supplies it. The morality, the impetus, what drives people. It's incredibly difficult to talk about, but it is very, very enjoyable. If you don't have to have something that you have seen before, if you don't have to have at least, 30% of your stories anchored in familiarity as far as environment or character, etc. is concerned, I would highly recommend it. I'm very glad to find that Dark Horse has put out these omnibus editions, because this is a collection. In this case, this is issues 1 through 21, all collected in here. And I think Larry Marder took a hiatus after that. He stopped doing this series for a long time and then came back to it. And this is everything that was done in the first go. In fact, I enjoyed this so much that I looked online immediately upon finishing it, and I did find the second omnibus as well, also from Dark Horse. I haven't started this yet, but the fact that this environment and this situation can lead to these many stories, and these are this is the original run, and I'm guessing this is the stuff that he did after he came back, and he quit to do something really cool too. I forget right now what I think he was a filmmaker or he was a producer in Hollywood. There are these hardcover editions of these things as well. These are very interesting comics, and I'm glad to have them in these omnibus because tracing them down in individual form or in those singles is just not something that we can do very easily here in India. So that's where my jealousy of everyone else who's been reading comics as they come out and as they're published and can find different editions of them comes in. But these are good editions. These are interesting comics. They are conceptual. They are brainy in some ways, but I think at the back blurb of one of these volumes says can be enjoyed by anyone from grade school to grad school, and that's really what it feels like to me. It's got this kind of universality to it where even young kids can enjoy the silliness and the madcap adventures and what's going to happen now sort of thing, and grown adults in sitting in philosophy classes can ruminate on the nature of these relationships, and everyone can get enjoyment out of that. It's very unusual, but it is unusually universal. There's nothing offensive, there's nothing problematic, there's nothing that you can't have a kid read. And at the same time, I can see people doing a PhD thesis on Beanworld. It's just one of those things, and there aren't that many that can sort of straddle both of those things equally, which is reason enough, I think, to at least check it out. And so thank you for recommending this to me. I don't think I would have ever picked this up if someone hadn't egged me to do it. I don't think it would have crossed my radar, or even if I'd seen a page somewhere, if I'd just seen something like this, I don't know if I would have thought, oh yeah, that's a comic I need to read. But I can see someone like, say, Scott McCloud take this, apart and say why this is brilliant and why this is great at a number of levels. Now that I mention it, I think there might be extracts of Beanworld in Understanding Comics. I'm not sure. I'll have to go and look at it. It just struck me that perhaps it's there. But yeah, very different from what I usually read, even though I try to be very, very, I'm so versatile, diverse, etc. This is good stuff, and it's very, very unusual. So that was Beanworld. Quick check in the chat to see Marder. Has Larry Marder done anything other than Beanworld? Fans, let me know. Is this his magnum opus? Is this the work that is this the only work that he's done? Is the only thing that he's famous for, or does he have other stuff? And I also, I'll look that up, of course. I know he's done other stuff in other mediums. So yeah, it's great stuff. All right. Let's move on to another unusual book that I think, I might have picked this up, but because of there we go, Megahex by Simon Hanselmann, which I think I've seen Simon Hanselmann in maybe anthologies. I'm trying to remember which. Maybe it was The Best American. Maybe it was that McSweeney's, All Comics issue number 14 or something like that. I've seen this art style and I've seen these characters somewhere before. I didn't remember if I didn't remember if Meg and Mog, this witch and this cat, are based, I think, very obviously, on Meg and Mog children's books, which are a series of adventures with a witch and a cat and an owl. So it's Meg, Mog, and Owl. This Meg and Mog have 2 G's at the end of their name, and that is where I think the similarity ends. I'm afraid of opening this book live on camera because this is some crazy stuff. This is extremely dark comedy. It's quite abrasive in certain ways. It is very transgressive where it finds its humor, but also what it considers humor. There is bad behavior galore. I don't know if I have encountered worse behavior from characters in a comic book that I've read. I'm trying to think, and outright murder, criminality, etc. aside, but it's fascinating. I found it fascinating. Meg and Mog are drug addicts. Mainly a lot of what seems like extremely high-powered pot. I guess. Also other drugs, including LSD, ketamine. They've got a friend called Werewolf Jones, who is just a volatile, explosive party animal, literally. Their roommate owl seems to be, completely shocked by the things. Well, not completely shocked, but he seems to be really pissed off and really angry. And you would think at the beginning that he's a stand-in for you, but no, he's pretty weird and deviant himself. But, and I think this is why this is not just. I'm going to try to be very careful, so I can give you a. This is so I can give you a sample of the art style. The interesting thing about this is, in spite of their extremely bad behavior and in spite of the way they treat each other, even though they're friends, and particularly how they treat poor Owl, in spite of all these things, these stories have an weird pathos in them. There is an examination of depression. And I think it's very obvious after a certain point of time that there is a sort of like deep depression at the center of a couple of these characters. The drug usage and the alcohol and the substance abuse seems to be a form of self-medication, but that doesn't mean this is a sort of teaching you about it's bad behavior, and it's ridiculously horrific stuff in some cases, and the humor is quite scatological. It has got a lot of toilet humor, it has a lot of drug and sex humor, a lot of deviance, as I was saying, but also it can be extremely emotionally affecting at the drop of a hat, in ways that are completely unexpected. And I think it takes a little while to get there. So I think for the first, I would say 30 or 40 pages, when I was reading this, I was just like, all right, what's, okay, this is funny and kind of funny and kind of disturbing. It's kind of horrific, but what is the point? And that's the part where I have to sometimes catch myself, where I was just like, why am I reading this story? What is it about these characters that I'm supposed to enjoy? What is it But the interesting thing was, in spite of me asking these questions, I kept reading them. I kept reading these stories, and this is a collection of short pieces. I think these were published separately in little magazines or zines. I think there are even earlier stories, prototypical Meg and Mog and Owl stories that have now been collected in a collection called Seeds and Stems. But those are earlier stories. Megahex is the first compilation of the more polished stories, at least from what I could tell from my little reading. And I got through the whole book in almost a single sitting, which for a book that I wasn't understanding, or I wasn't getting, or I didn't know why I was reading that, or why people were behaving so horribly towards each other and why they would put up with it, it sort of started coming into the story itself. It takes a while, so I was almost at the halfway point where someone, sort of said something that was on my mind, and then I was just like, yes, that's what I was thinking. Now there's a question, not that it gets answered, but the characters do sort of entrench themselves in your brain. The ways they behave can be it's definitely not for all tastes. If you are skittish about drug use, if you're skittish about toilet humor, if you're skittish about public humiliation and embarrassment and things like that, you probably, I'm not saying I love those things, I'm saying that I would have thought that I would be very turned off, or at least indifferent, where I would have thought, okay, this is just it's trying too hard, it's trying to shock me, or it's trying to scandalize or something like that. But it isn't really, because I've seen things that try too hard to shock you. I've seen things that are gratuitous and exploitative, and honestly, they're just boring. This is not boring. This is extremely interesting. It's very interesting if you've got the stomach for it. But I also felt that the empathy that it has for these characters. It's like sort of like anyone can love Atticus Finch, right? I mean, that's no. I'm not saying that's bad writing. That's good writing, but it's easy to love great, wonderful, fantastic people. It's really difficult, to love these kind of people. And I'm not saying that I love them. Again, I'm really worried that I'm going to turn to some page. But the way that, especially, I think, the way that it addresses depression, the way that but it doesn't have to be about a reason. It just has to be about a feeling. You wake up one day and you got this thing and this cloud hanging over your head, and then the kind of friends, who try to get you out of it, or in their own way. These things ended up being very affecting, and I think it wouldn't have been affecting in the same way if these characters weren't the kind of people they were. If they weren't behaving this way, it would have been a very different story. So I really was very surprised at how much I enjoyed this. So much so that, just like Beanworld, which also surprised me, I've picked up another book. This is One More Year, and I think this is another collection of stories. I don't think this is a long piece. There are a couple of other books out there. There's Meg and Mog Go to Amsterdam. There's the aforementioned Seeds and Stems collection, and I'm forgetting one. But Megahex is just is one of those books that I'm very glad that I found, and thank you again. I'm very glad that I read it. As I say, it's not for all tastes, so you have to be a little careful if you've never seen anything like that. I would recommend you maybe try out a page or two, or one of these short pieces if you can find them online somewhere. I'm not sure if they were published. I think they were published online. They may still be online as a webcomic, or they were only in print zines. But it's if you find the book, and you're not concerned about that, go ahead and take. Oh yeah, so look, Ashwita in the comments is saying that she picked it up and she just kept going, and that's exactly what I mean. Is that why am I reading more? This is, I think, the true sign of an artist. This is they are compelling in spite of your biases. They're compelling in spite. If I was to be very clear about what I read and what I don't read, if I was to be very clear about what I like and what I don't like, then there's really no point in reading anything new. Just keep reading the same things over and over again, because the artist overcomes your walls. It overcomes your boundaries. And I think Beanworld, without being offensive, without being ugly or anything like that, it does it in a very different way. It's just like conceptual stick figures, but like brilliant composition, interesting universe, rules, and messing with those rules for complications of stories. And Megahex, from the point of view of who are these people and why do they behave this way, and why have they, and why do they have these kind of existences? And the question is, why is not the right question. The thing is, now that they have these things, what do they do next? What are they doing next? It's that kind of compulsion, I think, that keeps us reading, is that we actually, in spite of ourselves, in spite of them, we care about these characters, which is I think a sign of true artistry, of true mastery of that narrative form. Whether it's to your tastes or not, obviously, is up for you to judge. But I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that Simon Hanselmann is a brain and is an artist capable of some very, very interesting, very powerful things. And I'm very glad that I picked up Megahex, and I'm looking forward to reading One More Year, and I'm probably going to get those other books as well, because I get the sense that this is the kind of stuff that just gets better, again, as he finds his voice, as he hones his craft, and tells you what happens with these characters as their lives go on. These are not they are episodic stories, they are little things, but they do have an accumulative sort of effect on you, and I'm guessing so will they on their lives. All right, time for some questions. Are there any questions? When you find out more about Hanselmann's life, yeah, I mean, I do sometimes get interested in author biographies and interviews and things like that. And I did watch an interview of Simon Hanselmann's on Noah Van Sciver's channel, another channel that I really love and admire. And it was hilarious. I didn't get much about his life, but his attitude and his presentation seemed to me to be a perfect fit, and I could see that sort of irreverence and this almost bombastic dismissal of sacred cows, etc. I could see that as a I like to sometimes keep a separation. I don't want to know too much about an author. I don't want to know, because I don't want it to interfere with the reading, because I'll be like, oh, this is the thing. But after I've read stuff, I don't mind going and finding out. So maybe I'll find out a little bit more about him. I don't know if I want to find out about him biographically, but I definitely want to watch more interviews with him, because he was just such an entertaining conversationalist, which is a great reason to put him on video and watch that. Yes, yeah, his interviews are really. I mean, again, I've only seen that one. I think I saw something else in a bookstore somewhere on YouTube. It was a short thing that was recommended to me, probably because I watched that Noah Van Sciver thing. But both of them, he came across as a very funny, very dry, and very acerbic sort of interview subject. And if you read these stories, I think you can see a lot of that coming through. But I think a lot of people can be just acidic. I think it takes real skill to put a little bit of heart into that and a little bit of emotion into that. And I think Megahex has a fair amount of that. Heatwave in one more year. Okay, all right. That's the thing about Megahex. I just kind of like galloped through it because I read one after the other. So I should probably go back and look at these things as separate stories. I mean, I remember a couple of them as separate stories, getting when Owl gets a job and an interview and things like that. But them as separate pieces, I think, could be. And that might be a good way to take these stories, actually, to read a story and to put it away and to think about it for a while and come back to the next story a couple of days later or even a week later. That might be the way to go. Yeah, I think you should be proud of him as an Australian. Yeah, he's from Tasmania, right? That's right. Yeah, so I think definitely. I think we need artists like that. I don't think there are any stories, even with, say, Usagi Yojimbo, which is my favorite comic, and I don't want every comic in the world to be Usagi Yojimbo. Then Usagi Yojimbo wouldn't be special for being Usagi Yojimbo. So I think that comics like this should definitely exist. I'm very happy that I read it, and as I said, I'm looking forward to reading. More. All right. Okay. Moving on. Let's see. What else do I have over here? This is from TKO Comics, Sentient, written by Jeff Lemire and illustrated by Gabriel Walta. And this might be. I think this is a pretty famous comic, or I had a number of people recommend this to me, but who recommended to me first, who you are. And they also recommended that I get this particular edition of it, and this is available in a trade paperback as well as this, which is a sort of box. And this box contains within it the 6 issues that make up this story. Oh, these are all backwards. There we go. So it's 6 large format, very nicely, produced, thick, glossy paper, thick covers. It's like thin poster board I was describing to some people on the Discord. And I mean, I will say that I was a little seduced by this format, by just the pleasure of having this, and these were all individually packed as well. So the first thing when you slip it out of this box that it feels like is, it's like as if you've got a little LP box set where each one is little plastic encased form, and this slipcase cover box set thing is very alluring. But of course, I'm a fan of Jeff Lemire. I've enjoyed a lot of his works, particularly his. I think he's done some of those licensed property Marvel DC stuff, but this I've enjoyed his self creator owned. I've enjoyed that. Essex County, I thought, was really good. I mean, I still think Essex County may be my favorite Lemire. I enjoyed Roughneck. I enjoyed Sweet Tooth, which had a lot more emotional weight to it than I thought it would. There are what else has Lemire written that I've read? That I recently read Black Hammer, and I might talk about that in another one of these installments. I read the first library edition. Sentient also has art by Gabriel Walta, whose work on The Vision with Tom King I enjoyed, and I talked a little bit about The Vision in my Mr. Miracle video. And I knew nothing about this other than the creators involved, and it comes in a nice package. And I was told that TKO Publishing is putting out these comics, and this one is the best of the bunch. There's also Sarah, which I was recommended. So Sentient and Sarah, I was told, are the two best comics to come out of TKO, and those are the ones I should read if I want to give it a shot. And I didn't think that this particular format would be available over here in India. I thought it would be the trade paperback, but when I went online to look, I found both of them. So this was just like, a few bucks more at that time. So I went for it. And I liked it. I think Jeff Lemire's writing, especially when it has to do with family and the bonds of family members, is quite good. He comes close but never crosses over into the purely sentimental, by which I mean something that is more alluring to the writer than to the actual reader. So I thought it was... It hit those marks very well. The science fiction, it's a science fiction story, and I don't want to say too much about it as far as the plot is concerned, because I do think that it is, it should be enjoyed knowing almost nothing about it. Like these covers themselves could be, they're not spoilers, but you could... Once you've read it, the covers take on different kinds of meaning. Otherwise, they're just interesting images, and I like that about it. I thought this story was a good story. It was a good science fiction story. I enjoyed it. I thought it was reminiscent to me, especially with the first issue and the way it ended. It was a little reminiscent of Saga, and I don't mean the sex and the more sci-fi and the more family oriented things about Saga, about especially the way that it was not just set in space, but the way that the narration worked and who's doing the narrating, and the way that they're somewhere in the future narrating about their past and talking about them as a child reminded me very much of Saga. And it also is, in my opinion, a thrilling setup. The only criticism, and it's not really that much of a criticism, is that I wanted more from it. I wanted it to be longer, and I think that's kind of a complimentary criticism, in which I wanted to read more. It seemed a little like it set itself up as if it was going to be a saga, as if it was going to be this epic thing, and then there were like two things. actually, only, and then it was over. And if it's the first chapter in a longer story, etc., I can see it, but it's not. It ends well, and it's resolved well, and I'm fine with the authors wanting to do it in 6 issues. It's just something about the pacing and something about the setup. Made me think I'm in for a long story in which a number of different things happen over a certain amount of time, etc. There is an initial again, I'm trying to not be because something like this really gets its power from the plot as well. There are certain stories that I think are kind of plot agnostic. This one isn't one of them. You've got to see what happens, you've got to see how it happens, and the beats and the manner in which the story is written. But I don't mean to say, as I said at the beginning of this video, I have enjoyed all of these books, and Sentient is one of them. It was very enjoyable. It was very entertaining. It was well written. It was superbly drawn. It had some interesting characters. It had some interesting twists, but it just felt like a third of a story, and it could have been, and it's fine if it wants to take its time and be a slow burn, but then make it 18 issues or make it 24 issues. I'm not complaining. I'll read them. So it ended a little too quickly for me. There wasn't enough in it, but it's only a compliment to the setup and to the way that the story started. I think the first issue, and maybe now I'm forgetting, maybe the 4th or the 5th issue are terrific issues. They're fantastic. There is a little bit of contrivance in the first one. Like, I had a question, like, why don't they just do this? It's like one of those things that come up in my head. But after that, once I just take that in, I swallow that, and I'm like, fine, they're not going to do that. They're just going to do this other thing. After that, the story really takes off. So it was its own fault that I wasn't completely 100% bowled over by it, because it started off so well, and it had a section in the middle that was so potent and terrific that it made me wonder what could have been. Why couldn't I have gotten more of these things? Why can't I have more issues like this one? Why can't I have further adventures or further tales? Why do they have to get to the end of the story? That was my only issue with Sentient. Really, I don't know if people will agree with me, and I don't know if maybe it's the way I read it, which I sort of galloped through it, and now I wonder that, well, then should I have bought it as a TPB? But I think I would have been more dissatisfied with it if the format can make a difference to the storytelling. I think maybe the TPB would have made me feel even more that it's going by too fast, or it ended too quickly. And so I'm glad I read it in these 6 issues, because at least it feels like I got chapters, and I finish one from cover to cover, put it away, open the next one, open the plastic wrap especially, and then start the second chapter. It at least stretched it out a little longer. At least it made it a little more paced out. And that's what I have to think about. Ended much earlier than I expected. Like, yeah, absolutely. Which I think is I think that is a compliment to the writers, but in some ways it is a criticism, because every writer needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then they need to hold together, And by writer, I don't mean the person writing the script. I mean, in comics, I consider the writer and the artist both authors. So I'll say author. The authors have to, sort of balance out the beginning, middle, and end. And this one, just a little bit of tweaking. Again, I just wanted more. That's basically my thing. Is there any? Sarah is excellent. Yes, I'm looking forward to Sarah. I've heard good stuff about Sarah. In fact, it's right over there. That's another one of those things. So it's like, okay, I got Megahex, and then I got Beanworld. I got another Beanworld. I got Sentient. I have Sarah. I'm also it's Steve Epting, I'm trying to. Elizabeth Brettweiser and of course Garth Ennis. Now, Garth Ennis is one of those people where I've read a couple of Garth Ennis stories, a couple of Garth Ennis comics that I really love. And then there I've read a couple of them that I'm not that big a fan of. So that's what I was, those are the things. And this happens with everyone, which is why, again, reader reviews, viewer suggestions and recommendations are so valuable. It's like if people know each other's tastes, at least to a certain extent, if they know what else they've enjoyed and liked, etc., they can give that sort of tailored recommendation, and that helps me because there's all this stuff by Garth Ennis. Which Garth Ennis should I read? Because I have been burned a couple of times on reading less than great stuff. But I know he's capable of really good stuff as well. So that's where my expectations are for Sarah. So maybe I'll have another one of these kind of conversations in which I talk about Sarah once I've finished with that. I think sci-fi in general has a very fast pacing. Yeah, it's possible. I think that's definitely one thing that people take up in sci-fi. Although, there is Solaris and there is 2001: A Space Odyssey, and they're great sci-fi stuff, and they certainly do take their time in cinema. It's more about the ideas, I think, and that's a good, sentient as artificial intelligence is one of those concepts that you can be extremely rapid with or extremely slow and have a slow burn with. I think Her, is the movie. I'm talking about movies, but Her is something I always think about when we talk about artificial intelligence, because it's such an anti-artificial intelligence sort of approach, and similar to that in comics, I did enjoy Alex and Ada, which I thought had a lot of similarities with Her, and, which is a good thing because in Sentient you have artificial intelligence, and so do you have it in Friendo. Which was sent to me. So DB is here in the chat, I see. So thank you. This is I'm calling out one person, even though I haven't named any of the people who recommend these things to me, because this is this is the next level of recommending or suggesting something. Like, here you go, which is what I always talk about. Right? It is like, why do you have books? You can have owning books has two main joys. One of them is the ability to reread something, right? So the idea is, why own something you could borrow, etc. First of all, I don't have libraries, but I always think that, yes, owning books is I can read something whenever I want to. I can pick it up off the shelves. I can reread part of it. I can look up something, etc. The other joy of owning something is you can lend things to people. And I know there are some people out there who are like, I'm never lending any of my stuff, but I don't mean to, people are not going to treat it properly. But I love the ability to take something off my shelf, someone's visiting and I'm like, read this, you have to read this, you love this, and I have friends like that. When I go to visit, I come back with a couple of books under my arm because they've taken stuff off their shelves and said, here, read this and you'll enjoy this and you'll like this. And so this is like, all the way from the United States, someone sends me a box of comics, as we've seen in my videos, and there are a number of them. I've read a number of them that I want to put in another video because they were all in single issues, and I want to talk about single issues really quickly and fast. Friendo is a trade paperback of a story published by Vault. Sorry, my thing here is mirrored. So this is published by Vault Comics. This is also about artificial intelligence. It's about a society which I first didn't understand what was going on, which I actually like in stories. I like stories that sort of just throw me into the into the middle of something, and then I have to sort of figure out what's going on, or I have to figure out what the rules are or what the logic is. It's a very, that in media res sort of thing is very effective as a storytelling tool. It immediately gets you invested because part of your investment, as you learn about the characters, as you learn about their situation, which is the long-term investment in the story, part of it is trying to figure out what's going on. So there are a number of stories that do that don't try to explain things to you, that don't give you too much exposition up front, and it it gives you a sort of drip feed. And I think a lot of science fiction actually just does do that, where they give you the world and they show you the technology and they show you the situations, etc. And only a little later do you understand what that is. And the gee whiz kind of appreciation gets you through the first part. And this definitely works that way. You're thrown straight into the middle of a very interesting, odd kind of situation, one with a flashback that then flashes forward into a situation where there is a Hollywood, but it's not our Hollywood. It's sort of recognizable though from that point of fame and fortune and what people want to be famous for, and how people who come here with big dreams, how they end up making their livelihood. And then it gets into this artificial intelligence area with this gift, with this pair of glasses that's given. Hold on. With this pair of glasses that's gifted to our our protagonist gets this, which creates an AI friend, the Friendo of the title, which is a thing that's going to be prevalent all over the place. Everyone's going to have these things. It's expensive, but this guy's girlfriend gets him this thing, and then he has this. Now that's that's a initial beginning that could be that could go in a number of different ways. What I enjoyed about this book, and I did enjoy this book, what I enjoyed about this book is how it takes commerce and money and makes that, it's not what you're expecting. You're expecting either amorality as far as the person is concerned, or you're considering, what is the difference between artificial intelligence and real intelligence, and all of these sort of heady things that science fiction does with AI usually. But this ends up being about well, first of all, he can't afford the subscription, so he's got the free version. So the free version means that his friend is only a friend if he can get him to buy stuff. And then there is a trauma, and because of that trauma, he becomes more and more dependent on this friend and this friend's company, this artificial intelligent friend. But if his friend is only around when he's buying stuff, then he's just got to buy more stuff, and he's got to rack up all this debt. He doesn't have money, and he's maxing out his credit cards and all that stuff so that he can keep the company of this artificial intelligence. And that by itself, I think, would have been clever enough and funny enough for a particular type of story. But honestly, that's just the first, I would say, quarter of the story, and then it goes further and it starts. Not everything in it works superbly, but what does works really well. And that's I've seen that with a number of stories, is that sometimes stories are very ambitious and they want to bite off a lot, and not everything is at the same level of expertise. But what I look for, and I think what works for most of us, is you've got to deliver on the key things, and then we can decide. And then when you look at a masterpiece, it delivered on all levels, and that's why it's so brilliant, because there's nothing in which it fails. But most things that are not masterpieces can still be pretty good if they get the 2 or 3 things right. I think Friendo gets more than 2 or 3 things right. I think this is pretty good on many, many levels. The social satire and the kind of human connections and empathy and the kind of commentary it wants to make on our corporate culture world, and our world where money and buying stuff and the profit margin and advertising are just taken as a given. And this is something that really appealed to me, because I'm not going to get into this rant right now, but I've often had conversations with people in which I say, but why are we taking this as a given? Why are we taking these sort of human exercises in commerce, etc., as if they're laws of physics or chemistry and stuff like that? And why why is that? Well, that's intellectual property, and a company is going to do what a company is going to do. Why is that the end of the conversation rather than the start of the conversation? And we can have many conversations about this, and we know this about creator rights and things like that. These things keep coming in about a corporation, but somehow it's just like, well, yeah, what else are you going to do? Or what else do you expect? That's what capitalism is, or that's what a company is, and that's it. This, I think, has a lot of those questions. This has a lot of those kind of observations, but done, to get back in. Done in a very fast-paced, very quick-moving, very slick, but also very exploitative with its violence and with its misadventures, etc. It keeps things moving, it keeps things slick, and it keeps things from, sort of getting weighed down with this kind of ponderous questioning. It's not like that at all. It's just there. It's there throughout, but it never kind of hits you over the... Well, I mean, that, I guess, is a question of interpretation. Some people might say, okay, it does hit you over the head, but I think that it moves the plot along quickly, and this is one of those things that I think, yes, this one was the right, this one was the right length. This if it had gone on any further, it might have sort of dropped the ball, but I think it's paced properly. It starts and it has this arc. It's got this confusion at the beginning, it's got this exposition in the second part, and then it's got further complication, resolution, in a way that I think it's these kind of stories, these kind of arcs that's fine in trade paperbacks. I like them. They don't have to be multi-volume. They don't have to be let's spin an entire universe out of this and let's try to get franchises going and crossovers and things like that. I like self-contained stories that are one and done, and in this way, and I like it. It's slick. It did remind me of things that I'd read, and all of the things that that I'd enjoyed. It's got traces, as I say, of things like Alex and Ada. It feels, it's from Vault Comics. It feels like an Image comic in certain ways. Certain parts of it also felt like Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky's Sex Criminals. I mean, not because of the plot thing, but because of its tone, because of its attitude towards its world, and I recommend it. I thank you for sending it to me. That was fantastic, and again, I don't think I would have been able to get this over here. Vault Comics are notoriously hard to get here at a decent price. They end up being quite expensive for some reason, which is what happened when I tried to source a copy of these Savage Shows, which I still don't have. So thank you very, very much for Friendo, which I also recommend. Okay, so that is, I think those are all the books except for my last one. Any questions before I move on to... Ooh, lots of nice recommendations. All right, I'm going to go through this chat and and mine it for more recommendations so that I can make more videos like this. But the last book I'd like to talk about today is my favorite, and I mean, I don't want to pick favorites, but they're all good books that I've read. But this one, sent to me by Paul Hatcher, again sent to me, is Becoming Unbecoming by Una. And this is published by a very... well, I remembered it just until right now, and I forgot. It's what is the name of this publishing company? It's not a company I've heard of, so it's not a big comic. And from what I could tell from the descriptions of myriad editions, so... from what I could tell about the author Una, she self-publishes very often. So I've not heard of this book, and I'd not heard of this author. I have not heard of this publisher, which makes it the perfect kind of present to send. And thank you for that, Paul. But thank you in particular because of how absolutely gripping and fantastic this comic was. This is one of those reads that sort of sinks its teeth into you and then holds on to you for a long time. This is a powerful comic, and it really has sort of burrowed into my head, and I can feel myself thinking about it in, both in pieces as well as the whole thing. It sort of echoes, and it's a fascinating work for many reasons. Plot wise, let's say, it's about some very difficult and very hard to digest topics. It's about violence towards women, both physical and sexual violence, often murderous violence. The author, the writer artist Una, weaves together two kind of stories that are actually one story. One is, there is this autobiography. It's an autobiographical story. It's a story of her childhood from the age of 10 or 12, which was in the 70s in the UK. But it's also, in the backdrop of this childhood is the Yorkshire Ripper, a serial killer who sort of terrorized this area for many years, murdering, raping and murdering women, and was not caught for a very long time. And this, the autobiographical part of the story is about the author's sexual abuse. She's the subject of sexual abuse repeatedly over a number of different incidents from a number of different perpetrators. Now, all of this makes it sound like a horrific thing to read, and it is in certain ways absolutely horrific, but the book is done as if it's a poem. It's beautiful. It's beautiful in its writing, its simplicity, its elegance. It's beautiful in its art and its layouts. It's, I won't call it experimental, because at no point of time was I lost. Just because, the text curves over a hill or something like that doesn't confuse you in the least. That's got nothing to do with it. In fact, the idea, let's see if I can get this a little closer. The idea that such subject matter should be tackled in such a way. It is both literal and figurative. It is both metaphorical and very, very, facts based. It's got. And this is a good example. Here you've got the territories. Here you've got the counties, and then you've got the reflection. It's both a map as well as something more than a map. It is the way that this story takes these things, and then it starts asking these questions, because it presents a lot of these things as vignettes. And it's got vignettes about her own life and her parents and her family, and then the assaults over many years, but done in almost a matter-of-fact way. And then it's got the story of these killings, of these serial killings. But through these vignettes and through these anecdotes, there are some very potent questions being asked about how we think of women, of what we believe when they say something and what we don't believe, why this serial killer was not caught for the longest period of time, what the police were missing. Almost feels like a like a Hollywood procedural about errors, like Zodiac, by David Fincher, where the miscommunication or the overlooking of things is leading to this continuing thing. But what is being miscommunicated and what is being overlooked over here is really stuff that's right in front of you, but you're not accepting it, and why you're not accepting it. And then you have that mirrored against the author of what she's going through, of what people she's able to talk to or not able to talk to, what their attitudes are towards her, how they, what's the vocabulary that we use to talk about women? What's the vocabulary that and is, men and women together, children, society, is the catchword. But who are these people? What is society? It's made up of preconceived notions. It's made up of individual behavior. All of these things done so elegantly. Again, this does not hit you over the head with anything. I think the greatest accomplishment of Becoming Unbecoming is how elegant it is, of how quiet in certain ways it is, where it sounds, by the time you're getting to the end of it, as if it's a shout. But like, for example, there is a theory that the serial killer is killing prostitutes. And this idea of it almost being acceptable, or at least understandable, because this is some righteous religious person who really thinks that these horrible things should happen to prostitutes. And it's not that people think that's right, but they understand it. But also the fact that if there is a girl who's not a prostitute who was attacked by someone, she isn't believed because it doesn't fit the story that they've already created. So whatever the truth is takes a back seat to the fabrications, and the fabrications come from something else. They don't come from the facts. They come from what belief systems people have of how their attitudes towards things are concerned. The way that crime against women and the way that the woman's body not being her own is explored over here in a way that I've really not encountered before was, to me, astonishing. It was just fantastic. As I said, this really stuck in my head, and a lot of that has to do with the way that the craft has been used in this book. It is elegant, it is gentle, but it is scathing, it is biting. Very late in the book, you get a little bit of polemic in which the author almost directly says things to you, which are facts, which are truths about society, etc. And even there, the way that it's done is, with word balloons and speech balloons coming from off the page, thought bubbles. This is comics. This is pure comics in the way that comics can be. It really uses the medium in over and over again, page after page, in ways that there is no other way. There is no other way to think, like, how could this story have been told like this? It couldn't have been done. I mean, you can think about making this a documentary, and of course we know that there are true crime documentaries and things that, use the film medium the way that it does. But this uses the comics medium in a way that I found astonishing, I found heartbreaking, I found lovely, I found beautiful, and it left me quite moved. It left me staggered. It also gets you to think about, it's set in the 70s, and there is enough about, over here to say that, all right, maybe this is what was going on in the big cities, but this is not what was going on in my life. This was not what was going on in my society. And then there's also this other removal where the author says, well, maybe today we live in a different kind of world, or maybe these things have changed, but maybe they haven't, and those are the kind of questions that I think that really stay with you. Is the voice truly, is it really expressive now? Are we past all of this? Does this no longer apply? Those are the kind of things I think that can keep you awake at night if you want to think about it. If you want to think about it deep enough. But yeah, so that's what I have. Becoming Unbecoming. Paul Hatcher, thank you very much for sending this to me. I covered these books briefly. I showed them in my unboxing videos of things that people had sent me. The same with Friendo, Megahex, and now I'm going to read one more here. Sentient, Torpedo. Maybe I'll find another volume of Torpedo. And the fifth Beatle and Beanworld. Those are the books for this episode of Recent Reads and New Acquisitions, the viewer suggestion edition. Thank you so much for these suggestions. As I said, this is just a sampling. There are many others, and I hope maybe that I can make this a part of a regular feature sort of thing. Any questions for me at this point of time? I know that I've been going on for a while, so yeah, this is a book, Tommy. If you're talking about Becoming, Unbecoming, I cannot recommend it highly enough. I mean, it's just a stunning work. I would be interested in knowing what everybody thinks of it. It's a book that, I think everyone should read. And then if you don't like it, let's talk about why you don't like it. Or if you think it should be different, then let's talk about why. But people should be reading it. And not just from the point of view of like social awareness or education or something like that. Although it does that. It's a question of storytelling and truth and even she says that this is not a confessional, so it's not quite that sort of like those that poetry or that school of thought. It's not that way. It's not catharsis through letting something go. It is using art to do something that I think is one of the purposes of art. So it's definitely, I agree with you, it's definitely the book to get. Yeah, exactly. It's not quite the David Hughes stuff, but yeah, it's a little related, maybe a cousin in some ways. But I do think accomplished because of the way those many strands are then brought together to sort of land with the impact that it does. How do you react to something that's a great story but is very disturbing or unsettling? I mean, those are, they're intertwined. Probably it's a great story because it's unsettling in these cases. So it's difficult to separate those two things. I mean, I think it's true, and I know a lot of people will say, well, it might be great, but I'm not going to read it because it's about this or it's about that. And I completely respect that. I'm of the mind that if it is great, it's great for particular reasons. I know, and I have my parameters that I think everyone does, but I find myself constantly reevaluating those parameters. I constantly find new things that are great in new ways, or ways that I have not quite encountered in exactly that form before. So that means that if it's unsettled, if it has unsettled me, I mean, some people would say that it isn't art unless it unsettles you. It isn't brilliant unless it shakes you at least a little bit. Because if it's just bland, or if it's just pre-chewed, pre-digested, regurgitated stuff, I mean, then it can just run in the background as you do your, chores at home. I mean, that's just something that's noise. That's not art. Art requires that attention. It requires that investment. So I'm okay with it. I mean, sometimes it takes, like, all right, I'm going to now recover from that, and then I'll read something else that is maybe a little different, or it hits different buttons, or it does different things. But I think even silly comedy, the art in silly comedy, it affects you. You're like, you sometimes feel the pain of someone getting whapped on the head, or it's supposed to reach out of the page or the screen or whatever and move you. So I'm usually not that worried about it. It's almost, I'm looking for it. I don't know if that makes me a sort of masochistic or something like that. Yeah, all right. Thank you very much. I think that's good for today, unless there's something that I've missed, anything specific. Yeah, just quickly, if before signing off, if there are folks who aren't on Discord, you should check out our Discord server, because a lot of like great discussions take place. I see some favorites over there are usual suspects. There are a number of people who are there, and I've started spending a little time over there when I can find time between work and all of that stuff, because I put it on my computer, and it's a great place to sit around and chat about comics and give recommendations and share what we're reading and all of that stuff. So I've really enjoyed, I mean, personally, I've had a great time spending time over there, and there are some very knowledgeable and expert people over there that I'm looking to get my next list of recommendations and what I'll be reading. So yeah, if you have the time, if you like the Discord, or even if you don't know anything about Discord, use the link that's up there in the banner of this thing, or it's there in a number of places. Maybe someone could share it over here, and I'll talk to you guys over there, and I'll see you at the next video. Thank you so much for joining me for this special live stream, and have a nice rest of the Sunday. Bye.